Right, good afternoon everybody. The time is now 2 o'clock and we will resume the hearing. Now firstly, can I just check that everybody who is on this session is able to hear and has the technology working. So I believe for this session this afternoon we have Mr. Jameson again from the council solicitor.
That's right, Ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We also have Bernice Turner from the council.
Yes, thank you, Ma'am.
Okay, can I just ask, is it Miss or Mrs? I'm afraid I don't have that information.
Mrs.
Miss, right. That's helpful, thank you. Good, thank you very much. We aren't expecting anybody else on this session this afternoon, so we can progress. My name is Helen Hockenhull and I'm a Chartered Town Planner appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Corby Part 2 local plan. Now, normally at this point, I would go into a few opening comments about how we operate in this virtual realm that we're now in. But as we have no other representatives with us apart from the council, I'm going to assume that the council officers are well aware of the procedure and I don't intend to go through all of that at this point. So is that acceptable to everybody? Yeah, good. Okay, lovely. Thank you. In that case then, we will proceed on to look this afternoon at matter 10, which looks at natural assets, in particular policies 6 and 7, which relate to green infrastructure corridors and local green space. Now, to start with policy 6 in particular, green infrastructure corridors, I think it would be helpful if Ms. Turner, you could just go through a little bit of the background to this policy, how the core strategy has developed green infrastructure corridors, what that has effectively done, and how that then relates to what you're now proposing in the Part 2 local plan.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am. Yes, the joint core strategy sets out the network of sub-regional and local corridors for North Northamptonshire. And what we've done with policy 6 is look to refine those local corridors and identify neighbourhood corridors where we can, based on an assessment of various local evidence-based studies. We've listed the evidence within our response to this question in the matter. But what we've also done is, through the consultation, we've taken on board the comments and done further reviews and taken on board the master plans for the SUEs, which have obviously provided more up-to-date local evidence to help us refine the corridors that we've then shown in Appendix 4 alongside the wider green infrastructure network to show the corridors within the assets.
Sorry, it's my fault. The green infrastructure clearly incorporates a whole range of different assets, which the supporting text to this particular policy outlines in some detail, which is excellent. But just to be clear, on my understanding, the core strategy sets out 3 sub-regional corridors. Is that correct? And it also identified 5 local GI corridors. Yeah, that's correct. You're muted at the moment, Ms. Turner.
Sorry, yes.
Okay, I know it's difficult to get used to the technology sometimes. So in terms of the local plan Part 2, you are refining those local corridors.
Yes.
And that's right. And so how did you go about that refinement? What process did you go through?
Okay, we explain in the matters, we explain the approach that we've taken to refining the corridors, which is within the report to Local Plan Committee on the 27th of March. It's examination library document PMS PD6. And within paragraphs 2.1 to 2.19 of that report, we outline the various stages that we've gone through in identifying. The starting point was obviously the RNRP Green Infrastructure Framework. It was a Green Infrastructure Suite that was done for the whole of Northamptonshire. And then we've gone through the process of including all of the other evidence-based documents to refine those corridors. We've used GIS mapping and aerial imagery to translate that and overlay the different layers. So for example, we used some work that was prepared by Northamptonshire County Council that they did to map the green infrastructure corridors, which we overlaid and compared. And where there were some differences, we used the more up-to-date master plans for the urban extensions to clarify proposed routes within those areas. Following consultation on the emerging draft options plan, we had meetings with neighbouring authorities, Kettering Borough Council and East Northamptonshire District Council, to review any cross-boundary connections, to take into account the Welland Valley route and also links to Tresham Garden Village, which are in East Northamptonshire's boundary. So we've taken it on board more up-to-date studies as we've developed the mapping.
Right, so in looking at that, you've obviously had the conversation with the joining authorities. So did that iron out any possible areas where there could be overlaps or mismatches between individual corridors? Were you looking at trying to achieve continuity?
Yes, I mean, I think obviously at the moment we're still separate boundaries, but what we've done is look at the Tresham Garden Village work. They did a feasibility study for their Greenway route that obviously borders on to Weldon Park, which is at the far east of our boundary. So we looked at where we could align the corridors there, where similar assets were located.
Right, okay, thank you, that's helpful. So in terms of the approach that you've taken, is there any particular criteria that you used to drill down on those local corridors identified in the joint core strategy? So then look at, are they still appropriate? Do we need to amend them? Do we need to look at additional, more local corridors? How did you refine that?
We did a review, which we did on GIS mapping really, and overlaid different layers where we'd got from all the different evidence, and overlaid the master plans and the habitat opportunity mapping and the mapping that was prepared by Northamptonshire County Council. Really, that was the one that differed ever so slightly from the RNRP work, which was then where we used the master plans to further align them for the corridors that they've got planned as part of the urban extensions. Right,
and do you use that same sort of approach in looking at the neighbourhood corridors as well as the refined?
Yes. Yeah. I think we determine the neighbourhood corridors based mainly on the urban extension master plans.
Right, okay, thank you, that's helpful. Okay, then can I have a look at the actual how you define the policy, the individual corridors on the policies map? I think the question I asked was why they were indicated indicatively.
Yeah.
So can you outline for me the thinking behind that?
I think the approach that we've taken, that we provide in the matters, is that we've followed the National Planning Practice Guidance, which says that the policies map should illustrate geographically the policies in the plan. So we've provided a graphical indication to help apply the policy, but also we've taken a very similar approach to Wellingborough, in that there may be, it's not just the assets themselves, that it's the connections between them, and there may be situations where it may need to be applied flexibly. So yeah, the line on the map is that obviously needs to be taken in context and reflect the fact that they are multifunctional in nature.
Right, okay, that might be a good time actually just to actually have a look at a policies map, because I don't know what you've got in front of you there, but for example, this is only one by example, the Cottingham and Middleton Inset map I've got here, and that shows in green we've got some indicative sub-regional GI corridors, and in blue we've got indicative local GI corridor. They overlap, which is fine, which they may well do because it's part of connectivity. But in terms of actually putting a line on a map, if you will, what sort of criteria do you use to define exactly where these routes would go geographically?
For the most part, I think they probably would follow the RNRP work, which we used their mapping layer as our starting point, and translated that onto our own mapping. I'm trying to think if some of these may have had modifications to the version that I'm looking at. But I think we looked at public rights of way, where the assets that we had identified within Appendix 4 also helped to align the corridors.
Yeah.
But again, it was to take into account where the majority of the green infrastructure network assets was really where we aligned the corridor.
Right, okay. And just looking at the maps themselves, where the lines have been drawn, this is going down to real detail and minutiae here, I'm afraid. But in terms of where they are drawn, yes, I appreciate they're indicative, but they do go through individual properties. They're going through urban areas. What implications does that have for those other uses that are then covered by those corridors?
I think the nature of the policy and the supporting text acknowledged that it's not necessarily just the assets on the ground, but the connections to them, and that they're not only considered to be green infrastructure assets. There's a variety of reasons why they're within the green infrastructure assets. I think we say in the opening paragraph of the supporting text, they provide opportunities for sustainable movement, whether for leisure or travel. We explain the multifunctional nature of green infrastructure. So I appreciate it probably goes through some people's gardens, but it could be because they're rich in biodiversity and habitat. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will be affected in the application of the policy. It's more just that we've picked up on them as having value, which is why that they've been included within the network.
Right, okay. That actually, to an extent, answers the question, really, in terms of, I suppose, if I owned a house, for example, and I have got a green corridor going through my garden or even through my house, the obvious question is, well, what impact will that have on me if I want to extend or whatever I want to do? So what thinking is behind the policy and its application? How would it affect something like of that nature, where someone wants to come forward with a proposal?
Yeah, criteria A, I mean, obviously the purpose of the policy is to follow on from the Joint Core Strategy Policy 19, which is to protect, enhance the natural environment. That's really all the purpose. And criteria A is to ensure that new development will not compromise the integrity of the existing green infrastructure corridors. So really, we don't want to see those assets being affected, and development should be looking to improve and enhance those assets where possible. I mean, I would expect that a residential planning application would have very little impact on something like this, but it's something to be considered. It's good place shaping to consider our assets alongside any development.
Yeah, I think it's just being clear in the policy, and probably more in the supporting text in this case, to give some confidence and some reassurance to all parties that the implications of this policy in terms of where those corridors are, that it will be considered not only in terms of the integrity of the corridors and wanting to maintain those and enhance them, but it isn't something that will be used to be too restrictive in an urban situation.
Yeah, no, yeah, I appreciate that. The only thing that we do say in the supporting text at paragraph 5.11 is say it's envisaged this is achievable on all developments that may be within or near to corridors, and it's often act as drivers for the design of the place. So it's perhaps not necessarily something that would have an impact on what could be delivered, but perhaps maybe the way in which it's delivered. So I think that's our approach for how we expect it would be applied.
Right, okay. All right, thank you. That is very helpful. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Can we look then, I think probably the best thing to do now is look at the modifications that you're suggesting to this policy, because there are a number of them, and they do address some of the concerns raised by various parties, including Natural England. So maybe you could just take me through those particular modifications and why you think they are necessary.
Okay. There are a couple of main modifications to the policy itself. Main modification 7, you did ask the question in these matters whether this applies to all development, and we acknowledge that its development that's in close proximity, obviously where that applies. So we propose to remove one of the representations. In main modification 8, we propose to include an additional criteria to ensure that wherever possible, new tree and hedgerow planting connects to or is provided within the green infrastructure corridors. This is to satisfy a representation from Natural England, which they have since agreed they are happy with. And in main modification 9, just for clarity really, for the development industry, we said using developer contributions to facilitate improvements to their quality and reasonably required to support the development and mitigate its impacts to achieve sustainable development. So just really to add clarity. From the policy slats point of view, some were to correct labelling of the corridors in the pre-submission draft, and to satisfy Natural England, because I don't think we had shown the sub-regional corridors clearly enough. So really it was just England have since agreed they're happy with.
Right, yes, I'm aware of that. Thank you for that. That's helpful. Yeah, I think one of my questions, I think, was in question 3, was in the MIQs, was the justification for the policy applying to all development. And I think to an extent you have explained that. Clearly, not every development will have an implication for a GI corridor, and I think that the revised modifications help to address some of that. You are proposing to remove, you're suggesting the removal of the word existing within the policy wording. How does the policy as drafted relate to any future GI corridors that may come along, any proposed corridors?
Yes. So by removing the word existing, any, I suppose that would be as part of a review to review the policies map. But if any new corridors, I don't imagine they're expected to change significantly, given that we've taken into account the 3 main urban extensions that are within this plan period. So we've taken into account their master plans. So I suppose they would be where any new corridors would be formed. But otherwise, I imagine we'd pick up on the majority of the existing assets. So I suppose it would be where any enhancements within the existing urban area come forward. I suppose we would have to take account of those in the future as part of a review to the plan.
Right, okay, no, that's fine. I think that's helpful. Yeah, that answers the question really. Okay. Can I look at the objective of the policy in terms of how mitigation and compensation measures will be secured? Now, I have noted from your hearing statement that you suggest that it's quite clear in the supporting text that you are looking to ensure mitigation measures and also outline compensation measures. Your hearing statement suggests that criteria A to D sets out the ways in which mitigation measures will be achieved, and criteria D and E outline the compensation measures. My reading of the policy is that it's not that necessarily clear or effective to explain that that is your intention. And I just wondered whether or not you could expand on this particular point a little bit more for me, and whether you feel it is clear and effective that what you are trying to achieve through the policy in applying that to developments is really to achieve that mitigation and compensation. And what are you trying to achieve in bullet points A to D? I'm not sure it comes out clearly or strongly enough which relate to compensation and what relates to mitigation.
Okay, I'm possibly going to reiterate what we put in the statement, that, yeah, we felt that A to D showed how we would expect green infrastructure corridors to be mitigated. And those changes, it would now be criteria E and F would be mitigation, which, and I know you've acknowledged what we've said about the supporting text. I think we've proposed the main modification to criteria F to make it clearer. It would be necessary and reasonably required to support development and mitigate its impact to achieve sustainable development. So I suppose it's whether you feel that's sufficient. We also, we do acknowledge in our response that policy 6 should be read together with paragraph 56 of the NPPF and policy 10 of the JCS in seeking developer contributions. And we do have a planning obligations supplementary planning document which encourages developers to prepare master plans for larger developments to translate GI aspirations into detailed proposals. So we attempt to provide further guidance, but obviously with applying the policy.
Yes, no, I think the objective is fine. I think it's whether it comes out strong enough in the wording of the policy, particularly as the second sentence starts, this will be protected and enhanced by, it doesn't make reference, say, to compensation or mitigation within that. Possibly that is one way of trying to strengthen the wording of the policy to make it clearer, more effective, that it is not just about protection and enhancement, but there is also the mitigation that may be necessary on occasion, and also the compensation that may be necessary.
The only other thing I would add is I know you've acknowledged paragraph 5.12 of the plan, that it says that where the first instance wouldn't be for compensation. We've tried to be clear in expecting that the green infrastructure corridors, that their integrity wouldn't be affected. So I suppose really the supporting text is attempting to demonstrate that it's only where there's an unavoidable need to trade off existing green infrastructure assets. So I suppose,
yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Yes. Okay. Can we move on to a number of comments from representatives which relates to whether the policy is clear enough in terms of the council's expectations with relation to developer contributions and how the policy would work. Now, I understand, and we've already gone through the fact that you are proposing to change the wording of that particular bullet point, which will become bullet point E, to state that developer contributions to facilitate improvements to their quality that are necessary and reasonably required to support the development and mitigates its impacts to achieve a sustainable development. Now, I think that is helpful to do that. Do you feel that that is sufficiently clear within the policy and the supporting text in particular to outline what the council's expectations are in relation to developments coming forward?
I think so. I think that with paragraph 5.11 is helping to show how the council expects that the policy would be applied, which guides using that policy. I'm not sure I have anything else to add. I
think what I'm trying to explain is that from a developer's perspective, it's having that certainty that most developers seek in terms of what will be required and what is expected of them. So in terms of those developer contributions, yes, they should be necessary and reasonably required to make their development acceptable in planning terms. But in what way would the council be seeking those contributions? Is there a particular process you wish to go through? Is there a criteria-based assessment of how much the contribution would be, or where the contribution would be used? How would it be effectively, in practical terms, how would it be used?
Okay, yeah, we don't have any further detail at the moment. I mean, beyond what's in the planning obligations SPD, which really is just as a guide to developers for how we would look to secure developer contributions. And I think we clarify that we would only be looking to secure on 10 or more sites of 10 or more dwellings. So there is some guidance, which obviously I appreciate predates this plan. But that's just guidance as to how we would be looking to secure contributions for any planning application.
Right, okay. I think what might be helpful is if you have a look at the supporting text and see if you can make that a little bit clearer, and even just make reference to the SPD on developer contributions, because that will give some certainty and clarity over how you would approach this and how you would seek those developer contributions. So I think that is something that I would ask you to have a look at. And how would those developer contributions be used? If you're looking at contributions, are they going to be used against the infrastructure delivery plan in terms of GI requirements? How would the money be spent?
We do have the North Northamptonshire Green Infrastructure Delivery Plan, which summarises the GI projects that are planned, and yeah, it's to improve the overall GI network. So yeah, that's something that we'll probably look to first. Right, so again, that could possibly be something that you add in the supporting text to say that it is likely that they would be used in that way. That you just make reference to the Northamptonshire GI delivery plan and the SPD as well, and developer contributions, just to give a little bit more guidance to developers over how you think that policy will be implemented. And I think that would just make it that little bit more effective overall. Okay, thank you very much. Right, I think my final question on my MIQs for this particular policy related to open space in new development located within GI corridors. And I think this has come up a number of times from certain representatives. I'm not quite sure whether it's just a misunderstanding or a lack of communication, but would you like to provide me with some comments about that and how this would work? How open space, public open space, which is required by other policies to serve new development, the relationship of that with green infrastructure? Okay. Yes, I think we've probably provided similar responses to some of the representations in the past as well. But the way that we are looking to apply the policy is that policy 1 encourages new open spaces, sports and recreational facilities to be linked within the wider green infrastructure network where possible. And we consider that criteria C of policy 6 also aims to ensure that new open space is connected to or provided within the defined green infrastructure corridors. So obviously there is a requirement to provide open space on certain types of development. Really all we're looking to do is ensure that where possible, this is located within or close to or enhances the connections between the existing green infrastructure network where possible. Right, so any public open space that's provided in a new development that is located in a GI corridor would still in effect count towards the open space requirement for that particular development. Yes. Yeah, I think that's where the confusion seems to lie with some representatives, just the relationship between the two, but that's helpful because that clarifies it nicely. Thank you. Okay, I think that's probably all I need to ask you on that particular policy, unless there's anything further you want to bring my attention to. I don't think so, thank you. No, okay, lovely, thank you very much. In that case then, I think we shall move on to policy 7, which relates to local green space. Right, so in terms of this one, I think what would be helpful is just to have a conversation first about how the council have assessed local green space in the borough, how you've selected and rejected certain sites. I know you're proposing one particular site, the community orchard, to come forward as a local green space. Just to outline how you have gone about that assessment and the sorts of criteria that you have considered, and does that comply with the national guidance and the framework? Okay. Yes, we developed a local green space designation technical guidance note, which sets out our methodology for assessing the potential local green space sites. And we developed a questionnaire as part of that, so that communities nominating local green spaces could complete the questionnaire to provide us with relevant information. We consulted on this as part of the emerging draft options plan, and received just the one submission, which is the Middleton Community Orchard. We then assessed this against the criteria within our guidance note and questionnaire, which includes a broad range of criteria, but the supporting evidence criteria includes information on local significance, beauty, history, recreation, tranquility, wildlife, and then we've then reviewed the criteria and took a report to local plan committee on the 27th of March 2019. That's evidence-based document EB3, which showed our assessment of Middleton Community Orchard against the criteria within the note. And this, we felt this was this met the criteria to be designated as a local green space site.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's clear. A nice brief summary there. The policy itself doesn't actually designate Middleton Community Orchard as an area of green space. However, it is, I suppose, by implication and inference, clear that you are proposing it as a piece of local green space. Was that a particular approach that you adopted for a reason, or is it just the way it's evolved?
Well, I think we were allowing scope for neighbourhood plans to promote local green spaces as well. So rather than limiting it to the one within the policy, as neighbourhood plans come forward, they could also look to designate. I think we include it in the supporting text and in the policies map. But no, it was perhaps just to add flexibility for any other sites coming forward.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay then. And the one area in particular I want to explore further with you is whether the wording of the policy is consistent with paragraph 101 of the framework in managing development in a local green space. So we've said that the policy 7 is consistent with paragraph 101. Paragraph 143 of the MPPF states that inappropriate development, which by definition is development that would be harmful to the green belt, should not be approved except in very special circumstances. And then paragraph 145 and 146 outline those exceptions. We state in policy 7 that planning permission will not be granted except in very special circumstances for development which adversely affects the designated local green space. And then in paragraph 5.16, we provide detail of those very special circumstances, which we believe is consistent with the MPPF. Right, okay. I think what I want to explore with you a little bit is certainly the framework policy in effect tries to indicate that the way to assess the development within a local green space, the policy has quite a lot of similarities to greenbelt policy. So it is looking at that balance, if you will, between the special circumstances. Are they demonstrated? So in other words, as the harm that's been identified, is that outweighed by any benefits? So it's this balance. It's what in terms of greenbelt terms, it's the greenbelt balance effectively. In terms of making that clear in policy terms for policy 7, as drafted, do you think it's clear that that is what that policy is trying to achieve? So in that sense, is it effective, that policy, in taking forward the principles of a greenbelt policy, but obviously relating it to a local green space? As we state, planning permission will not be granted except in very special circumstances, and then list the circumstances. So see if you think that's sufficient. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and I think it's helpful that you do outline what those very special circumstances could be in the supporting text, and that's helpful. I suppose really what I'm trying to establish is that for very special circumstances to exist, the potential harm to the designated space and any other harm has to be outweighed by other considerations. That is effectively the greenbelt balance that's applied to areas of local green space. So my question is, as drafted, is policy 7 sufficiently clear and effective to demonstrate that that's the balance that has to be undertaken in this particular case? We say that paragraph 5.16 will be protected and where possible enhanced. Development that will result in a loss will only be permitted in the following very special circumstances. Yes, that's right. I think, I'm afraid I don't want to linger this point too much, but I think from my perspective, my concern is that as drafted, the policy isn't sound, and it's quite a difficult policy to word, I think, in some ways, because you are trying to reflect the green belt balance, but to reflect that in terms of local green space. I don't know whether you can provide me with any further comments now, or whether Mr. Jameson can help us. He has his hand up at the moment.
Yes, ma'am. We'll have a look at
Jameson, that might be helpful.
There are two conflicting strands on this. Sometimes these policies attract opposition on the basis that they're applying strict greenbelt policies in areas outside the greenbelt, and that can be a criticism of them.
Yes.
And I know what you're seeking. Well, I think I know what you're seeking to say, which is it's all very well setting out the characteristics, but there is no planning balance reflected in the
Yes.
policy. That's what you're saying. So
Yeah.
It's all very well to have an impact, but any harm has got to outweigh the benefits. And I think we can take that away and have a look at it, because I fully understand the point that you're making. There's a lack of, you don't know how to apply any balance at the moment on the way the policies work.
That's right. So that's it. Yeah, I'm now referring to the green belt balance, but effectively you're right. It is the planning balance, but reflected in terms of the characteristics of local green space, effectively.
And that's the way we'll word it, ma'am. Yes. Yeah. But I understand, and we'll take it away.
That's fine. Okay, then I'm sure that there are other number of authorities that have formulated local green space policies that you might want to just reference and have a look at, just for examples. But there is no right or wrong way of wording this policy. But the key thing for me is just to ensure that there is reference to that balance.
Yes. You
have addressed the special circumstances nicely. That's in there, and you've outlined what those special circumstances potentially could be, but it's the weighing up, it's the scales, if you will, the balance isn't there. So that's the key thing, is to incorporate that within the drafting of that policy. No, thank you for that. Right, and I know it's been a very short session, but I think that's probably all I need to address in terms of policy 7, unless there's anything further from yourself, Mr. Jameson or Ms. Turner. Anything further in points that you wish to make me aware of in support of these two policies in this section of the local plan?
Not from me, thank you, ma'am.
No, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Well, I said that's all I need to address on this one. I am aware that there aren't many representations in relation to this particular policy, but we have, I think, gone through the key issues that we need to discuss today. So thank you for that. So I will adjourn this session now. As I thank you for your assistance and participation today. We have one further session later on today, which I think is 4 o'clock. So we'll resume then and continue our discussions. But until then, thank you very much for your assistance, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.